This is Stephen Nojiri, and this is another Tada Genji tradition video. This video is going to be a break from the usual method presented on this channel. Usually, I present Shotoko Jingunden, Tada Genji Jingunden, Kusuno Kiryu, and we go over teachings from manuals and summaries of actual teachings. This video is going to break from that, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through three questions, or we're going to go through 3 points, speculations based on historical data. And we're going to pose these questions, and the purpose of these questions is not to arrive at a correct answer, but to open the door to the debate, or open the door to thinking deeper about the topics. And I will present historical facts, but again, the purpose is not to arrive at a definitive conclusion, but the purpose is the procedure of you, the viewer, thinking about what I'm saying. The first point is going to be purely food for thought, and that point is it more accurate to view samurai as private military company or private military corporation rather than official state-run military? So are they are they mercenaries, a private military company, or are they like the U.S. Army? Which one of those is more accurate? Again, we're not trying to get to an answer, we're just opening the door for discussion. The second point is, what is the real reason behind the Southern and Northern Court war period? Right? What is the Southern and Northern Court actually fighting over? Now, this does have an actual historical truth, a definitive answer, which I'll get into. But what we're discussing, or what is up for debate, the thing that we're thinking about is that point's relationship to point number 1. And then finally, we'll close with point number 3, because we love ninja stuff, so let's close with something ninja. Point number 3 is that many people think that ninja magic is a product of the late 1600s, early 1700s. But is that what the record actually supports? Now, this is currently just a food for thought debate. However, the argument is currently under construction, and in the future, this might have a definitive answer. But for now, nothing in this video, with the exception of the historical truths presented, particularly in point number 2, this is intended, for this video, this is intended to be food for thought to get you thinking. Not to arrive at truth, but to the process of thinking about these points. So let's start with this first point. Are samurai more of a private military company or a private security force? Or are they something more like the U.S. Army, a state-run official military? Which one of these two are the samurai more like? Now, I know this question might upset some people because there's a lot of people who automatically assume that samurai equals state-run military force. But the historical record kind of actually shows them to be more like private military. But again, there's no definitive answer to this, because the concepts of state-run military, private military corporation, private security force, etc., 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 these statements are modern-day concepts. And to be honest, we're bending and distorting the historical samurai concepts somewhat in order to ask this question. So the viewer needs to understand that the correct answer to this question is the samurai are neither. The samurai are the samurai. And we would need to understand samurai solely within the context of the samurai. But for the debate, to open the door to this discussion, to open minds and expand vision, we acknowledge that we're sort of bending the rules and sort of distorting a little bit, but that's our skillful means in order to begin the investigation, or to get the wheels in the mind turning. So let's just jump into it. Since the typical stance is that, they're like the state-run military, I'm going to counter that, and I'm going to say, no, they're more like a private security force. And here's the reasons why, sort of the historical truths which caused the debate to exist. Japan had an actual rank and file, proper state-run military based on the Chinese military methods in the 700 ADs, and it failed. It fell apart due to the inability of the government to muster, manage, and maintain a large military force. When this official state-run military fell apart, it left a hole in the government's ability to engage in offensive and defensive engagements. In other words, they had no fangs and claws. That hole was filled by the sons of nobles and the sons of emperors who formed their own private armies and took assignments from the imperial court. It is also very clear from all historical data that the samurai were absolutely not rank and file soldiers. They did hire or force commoners into their private armies. We're all familiar with conscripted peasants and ashigaru, etc., etc. You know, some of these people were paid, some of them were just forced to fight. So they do create armies, but these are private armies. These are not state-run armies. These are private armies. They are the property, if you will, of the samurai, not of the state. And so as you see on the screen, the imperial court did not register, control, or maintain any of these forces. These forces were purely private matters of the samurai, who then would use their private armies, private military forces, in order to, fulfill any sort of assignments that they took. So let's just take a moment to think of a modern version of this. Now, again, this is bending and distorting things, but to get those wheels in the mind sort of turning in for this debate, a modern day sort of analog would be that a senator, so a government official, a senator, that senator's son is born into money and power, and that son builds his own private army, builds his own private security force. That son hires some sons from other senators, and he also hires or forces local people to serve in his private army. So maybe, he hires other sons of senators, and he hires some, other people to be his ashigaru, his sort of rank and files. He may even, human traffic sort of people to do the laundry and do the janitor. There's all different ways this happens, but historically speaking, when you conscript people against their will, when you force them to fight because they're in your territory, it's a little bit like taking them hostage. So this son has now created, through both paying and by force, has created this private army. All right, so once he has that, then his father, the senator, contacts him and lets him know that, say, I don't know, the president or the prime minister, which would be analogous to the emperor, right, needs a job done and wants him to handle it. So while historically speaking the job is an order from the emperor, it's more akin to a private contract with the samurai than actual marching orders from a military commander. Now, it's kind of, in reality, it's sort of a hybrid. The emperor is the god king, and when he says, I need you to do such and such, then there's sort of more societal regulations where you're not really supposed to refuse that order. But it is, again, more of a request. It's not like a general and an army is giving you marching orders and that's that. It's more like you're being given a private contract. Somebody's contracting you for an assignment. Okay, so we'll stop there with that point and let the wheels of thinking go and let that debate open up and let the ideas flow. Let's move that then into point number 2. Now, point number 2 is an actual real thing, but the debate or the thing we're speculating on is its relationship to the speculation presented in point number 1. So point number 2 is, what is the actual reason for the northern and southern wars, right? And most people get this factually incorrect. Many say that the war is between two emperors. This is not accurate. This is the key point. All right, as a matter of fact, I can almost say if you get nothing from this video, take away this point. The war is about the sovereignty and power and autonomy of the emperor over the samurai. This begins with the Kemmu Restoration. Emperor Go-Daigo was not fighting another emperor or another imperial house. Emperor Go-Daigo and Kusunoki Masashige were fighting the Hojo shogunate. The Hojo shogunate is and this is where it connects with one, was a private military industrial entity that had taken power and sovereignty away from the imperial court. This power had been transferred to private hands, aka the Hojos, the Hojo family. Emperor Go-Daigo and Kusunoki Masashige were fighting over who had the jurisdiction and control over the country, and specifically who has jurisdiction and control over the imperial court. So let's unpack this and expand it further. The samurai were the sons of emperors and sons of nobles who had built their own private military forces and took assignments, took jobs, took contracts from the government, the emperor. They did this for reward. They gained title, they gained property, they gained servants, they gained cash, etc., etc. The samurai eventually got so powerful that they began to interfere with the workings of the government, the imperial court, and wrestled the autonomy of the imperial court away from the emperors. Now this begins with the Genpei War situation, but this really clocks in the 1200s when the Hojo shoguns essentially steal the control from the emperors and start telling the emperors what to do. And that's the key problem. That's the point where you need to write the star. The problem begins when the shoguns start telling the emperor what to do. So this is what Emperor Go-Daigo and Kusunoki Masashige, this is why they fought the Kemmu Restoration and destroyed the Hojo shoguns. They destroyed the military industrial entity, the private military industrial entity that had taken the power away from the emperors. This was the government wresting power and authority back from a private entity. This is similar to, in modern times, if you want to think of a modern example, this would be like the government wresting control back from a private security company. Say that private security company had been contracted to do, security work, but then instead of just doing security work, they took over the government. And so this was then the government wresting control back from the private security company. So now the government is in charge of itself again. Now, hopefully, many of the viewers are hopefully aware of what happens next. So after the Kemmu Restoration was completed, Go-Daigo won. The country went back, the authority of the government went back to the emperor. The emperor was no longer taking orders from the shogun. The shoguns were back to taking orders from the emperor. A samurai named Ashikaga Takuiji decided that he was not getting enough reward. And it wasn't just him. He was the main person who decided he wasn't getting enough reward. But there was a lot of other samurai that had the same feelings. And so when he announced that he was going to stand up against the emperor, just like the Hojo did, they joined him. So again, there was a collective of samurai who were like, we're not making enough money. We don't have enough power and authority and money and land. We don't like this. So we're going to do basically what the Hojo did, and we're going to tell the emperor what to do. So essentially, Ashikaga creates his own private military corporation and decides to just wrestle control of the country away from the emperor. What they had just restored, he now is seeking to break. So he goes and he finds a member of the Jimyoin line of emperors and decides that Go-Daigo is no longer emperor and that the Jimyoin emperor is now in charge. All right, and so this is a key point. This is where you need to draw a star. Okay, this is where historians often make a critical mistake. They often think that the fight is over which of the emperors is real. Is the Jimyoin emperor real? Is the southern emperor real? Which emperor is real? So the Jimyoin emperor is the northern emperor, and then the southern emperor is Go-Daigo, right? It's a different line of emperors, right? It's basically branches of the family. Both lines are legitimate, so the fight is not over. Is it a real emperor or not? That wasn't the issue. The issue was the emperor is the only one who gets to say who is emperor. The shogun does not get to say who is emperor. That is the actual issue. The samurai does not get to make these decisions. The private security force does not tell the government what to do. And, just for the record, the Jimyoin line died out in the mid-1400s. And so the Southern Court should have gone back, should have been given the authority of the country by default. The basic rules of Shinto say that, like if this line dies out, then if the Jimyoin line dies out, then Go-Daigo's line automatically gets it, because that's the sequence of the lines. Each line has an order of seniority, and the Jimyoin line technically was more senior to Go-Daigo's line. However, when that line died out in the mid-1400s, it should have automatically gone back to Go-Daigo's line. But the Ashikaga shogun said no. They just went and found a line of emperors that at that point the people they picked is very questionable if they even should have had access to the throne at all. So at that point it becomes kind of an issue of, the primary issue is the who's in control of the country, the emperor or the private security contractors. But it also, in the mid-1400s, it also becomes a slight issue. The issue of authenticity of emperor does enter into the equation. So let's summarize these points and let it all gel in your mind, and let your mind expand. Think about this, chew on this, food for thought, get the wheels turning. You're not supposed to come to any definitive conclusion. It's just supposed to stimulate your thinking about these topics, deepen your understanding by exercising these thoughts, exercising these sort of investigations and ponderings. So the samurai, I'm going to read through it. The samurai are not really rank and file enlisted officer military. They're not a rank and file state-run military. Many people like to use this model, but it doesn't seem to actually hold or match the historical record really. Japan has had an actual state-run rank-and-file military 2 times in history, in the 700s, right, and then from the Meiji period onwards. And then, of course, that gets complicated after World War II, but that's beyond the scope of this video. But the point is Japan has had rank-and-file state-run military, and then they've had the private security forces of the samurai. So you can't do the argument to say, well, Japan never had a rank and file, it's always just been the samurai. No, they have had rank and file twice in their history. So you actually do have a comparison. Samurai are the nobles, they are nobles themselves. They're the descendants of emperors who weren't eligible to take the throne. Then they go and they make these private military ventures, and they amass their own private armies, and they amass wealth, and they amass land and servants and peasants. And even if they get fired from one master, aka contract, they can just find another master, aka another contract, and keep earning money and land. And in red, even when you have a commoner who becomes a landed samurai, because the social mobility exist for a period of time, even it's still the same thing. Even if you have somebody who starts off a commoner and he becomes a samurai, and then he can prove himself in battle, and he can earn enough money that he can get a fief, he can get a patch of land that has some farmers working on it, he can hire some people, he can work his way up the private security corporate ladder to become a daimyo, in theory. So this private military company mentality is what led the Hojo to wrestle control from the emperors, and then that led Emperor Go-Daigo, to wrestle it back, right? But the country has suffered from this continual conflict of who's in charge. Is it the private security force, or is it the emperor? And this question has actually beaten the country of Japan senseless from the Kemmu Restoration until the Meiji Restoration. If you look at the source of pretty much all of the issues that Japan has faced, it is always, generally, it can be traced back to some samurai clan overstepping its bounds. Alright, now let's move on to point number 3. When did ninja magic actually become big? So it's fun. That's point number 3 is about ninja because it's always fun to end on something ninja. You know, a lot of the viewers, I know a lot of you guys really love Shinobi no Mono, so we're going to end on something Shinobi no Mono. Most scholars will tell you that ninja magic, quote unquote, shinobi ritual, was something that was developed in the late 1600s, early 1700s. And they say that this is because the ninja were dying out and the ninja needed to create an alternative purpose for existing. You also have some other scholars that they'll go further. They'll even tell you that early shinobi no jutsu or early ninjutsu was devoid of magic and that magic is added later because the samurai become more interested in magic through the 1600s. So those are sort of the two claims that are quite frequently put out there. Both of the above statements, however, can be shown. I originally said to be false, but let me say that data exists to counter those two claims. There is ample evidence to begin to support the idea that the interest in magic was deep and actual that the interest in magic was deep in the beginning, and that interest in magic actually slowed in the 1600s. So there's data to actually show the opposite of the above claims. But now this video is already kind of too long, and we can revisit this topic in the future because, as I said in the first slide, this is a debate that is under construction, and this debate may actually reach a definitive conclusion at some point in the future, but for now it's just food for thought. Let's look at sort of a bullet point of the few pieces of data that begins to provide the counter-argument. Okay, overall, the older samurai manuals are filled with magic. And when I say older manuals, I don't mean, from the early 1600s. I mean the ones that go back to like the late 900s, the 1100s, the 1200s, 1300s, all of the manuals that are old at the time of the 1600s. These manuals are filled with magic. The old Genji manuals are filled with magic. It shows a clear pattern of samurai warriors. Not even specifically just shinobi, but Genji samurai, because we're talking in this particular case, we're talking about Genji manuals. Genji samurai being very interested and very into magic and ritual. We find all manner of Buddhist and Shinto rituals and spells in these older manuals. We find the seal of Domon and the seal of Seimei, which you guys know as sort of the 5-point star and the Kuji grid. That's the seal of Seimei is a 5-pointed star with a circle around it, and the seal of Domon is the 9/ grid. We find these used by the Genji over hundreds of years. It's not just, in the 1600s Kuji Kiri got big. No, we find seal of Domon and seal of Seimei magic, for over hundreds of years. So chants, charms, amulets, rituals, all of these appearing in great number from the late 900s into the early 1600s. So there is a clear pattern of magic and ritual for hundreds of years leading up to the 1600s. So there is no boom in magic in the 1600s. It's already well present and deeply rooted in the samurai traditions for hundreds of years prior to the 1600s. Because shinobi no mono are samurai, especially now, I know that when we get into the late 1600s, it gets a little dicey, but leading into the 1600s, shinobi no mono are samurai. There is no reason to believe that the shinobi no mono somehow were not also involved in this long-standing tradition of magic, rituals, and charms. In other words, shinobi no mono are samurai. Samurai are obsessed with magic and rituals and charms. Therefore, the logical conclusion, the probability is higher that shinobi are equally involved in magic and rituals. The lesser, or the thing that you would have to prove, the thing that you would have to argue, is that the shinobi were somehow uniquely different, and unlike all the other samurai, they were not obsessed with magic and rituals and charms. And you can't really show that in the historical record. Because, for example, the Kusunoki-ryu manuals, right? They have magic and ritual in the oldest text. It's not until the texts that are written in the 1600s that you start to see the magic and spirituality materials become less and less. In other words, the older stuff has more religion, quote unquote, and the stuff that's produced in the 1600s is more non-spiritual things. That's what the record actually shows. So we just talked about the Genji material, Tada Genji material, Kusunoki material. Let's talk about Shotoku Jinganden. So we know that the Shotoku Jinganden goes back, in the most conservative estimate, goes back to the 1570s. Now I would argue it goes back further, and the Shotoku Jinganden of itself argues it goes back further. But if we're looking at the most conservative estimate, meaning like the oldest documents that we can find, and we were to assume that those documents were not transcriptions, but they were the original documents, and that they're not transcriptions, and that they're written for the very first time, that would be the 1570s. So in the most conservative, 1570, that's pre-Edo period. Okay, so we're looking at a definitively unquestionable pre-Edo period. The Shotoku Jinganden is filled with magic and ritual, and interestingly enough, many of the rituals and magic and beliefs seem to be reflected in the Koka Shinobi writings of the late 1600s. For example, texts like the Ogiden and Kimura Sensei's statements, and not his writings because he's dictating, but his statements that are written down. These have always been assumed by most researchers to be created in the late 1600s, early 1700s. But many of the ideas presented seem to be rooted in ideas that can be found in the Shotoku Jinganden from the 1570s. And now the green star. This is why this is important, because this provides a pathway for these ideas to be older than the 1600s, and destroys the arguments that the ideas had to be completely fabricated in the late 1600s. Kimura Sensei's statements also clearly say that shinobi of the late 1600s, early 1700s are no longer interested in magic, and that it is a tragedy because magic is one of the key elements of shinobi. So, if the shinobi are only supposed to be interested in magic in the late 1600s, early 1700s, why is Kimura Sensei saying that they are no longer interested in magic at that time period? Now, do these speculations follow the general historical trends that we know and can be proven with historical data points? And the answer is yes, it does. Consider these points. For example, let's just go through some random points. We see Yui Shosetsu writing, actually complaining, in the 1640s that some samurai schools are nothing but magic. Now, I did a video a long time ago on a different channel about this text where he goes through, I think it's 9 or 10 different types of samurai schools, and he's sort of pointing out the flaws with each one. And one of those types of schools are schools that are nothing but magic. He actually has an issue with that in it. But the point is, in 1640, there are samurai schools that are nothing but magic. So this shows that that's not a development in late 1600s. It's already got so much samurai magic in the 1640s. In fact, many of the manuals of the 1640s, the things that are coming out in the 1640s, whether they're new material or whether they are, printings of older materials, there's a lot of magic in many of those texts. But in the 1640s, 1650s, you do begin to see a decrease in the amount of magic overall. So you see in the earlier text lots of magic, and then in the 1640s, 1650s, you start to see the magic getting less and less. This actually evidences a trend in a decrease in magic, not an increase in magic. You also have statements from people like Kumazawa Banzan, who in the late 1600s says that the samurai have become far less religious than they have ever been. And he writes that Shinto is a shell of its former self, and that Shinto needs to be fixed and Shinto needs to be revived, and that the samurai need a revival of their spirituality just in general. Now, this is Kumazawa Banzan in the late 1600s saying that samurai are losing their interest in magic and ritual and rites. So again, that evidence is not a climb or an increase in magic, but a decline in magic. We also see this semi-atheism of the samurai developing and appearing because of ventures such as the Mito domain scholars, who become thought police, and they actually begin suppressing ideas, suppressing magic, suppressing rituals that they do not think is in line with the government needs, right? So one way to read that is suppression of magic, because magic would make you strong. So if magic will make you spiritually strong, you might be a threat to the Tokugawa shogunate, so they need to start getting rid of magic that might make you a potential threat. Another way to read that is simply that a lot of the scholars of the late 1600s just are not believing or caring about magic or religion much because of this sort of culture of the Edo period culture, the Tokugawa culture, and they are viewing older gungaku as outdated, and they're dropping things like magic so that they can go study fencing. And we'll actually see that as the point on the bottom is that gungaku as a whole begins to lose ground, and combat arts begin to take over. So there's a shift. Samurai start to look at gungaku and magic and things like the castle building, and they start thinking, well, that's like old stuff. And the new creations of the Edo period, the fencing schools, the sword draw schools, the hand-to-hand combat schools, and the sort of political climate and political realities, the current trends of the late 1600s are obviously catching samurai's attention more than these older things from the Sengoku period. And sort of in keeping with the Mito domain scholars suppressing religion and magical rituals and stuff, we also see, at this time, Shinto scholars are struggling to deal with these issues. So Banzan is saying they're struggling with it. The Shinto scholars themselves are struggling with it. You see Shinto scholar writers, they're struggling in the late 1600s, early 1700s, because people Shinto's taking a massive hit. Samurai are just not caring anymore about Shinto. They're not caring about imperial, descent. They're not caring about the gods of Shinto. There's this issue, and so they're trying to keep their religion and their jobs going without running afoul to the current cultural trends of the time, or running afoul of the government. Alright, so this video is too long, and so let's conclude this discussion. We're out of time for now. Again, the purpose of this video was never meant to present right or wrong. It's simply to provide ideas for you, the viewer, to consider, to ponder. We did attack 3 ideas, though. We attacked the idea that the samurai are the official state-run army. We've attacked that idea. History has shown us what a Japanese state-run rank-file army is, and they have showed us what the samurai are. Now, the samurai are the samurai. In the discussion, I said that the samurai are more like private military contractors versus state-run military, because I think that's more of an accurate thing to say. However, remember, the truth is that the samurai are neither private military companies or private military contractors, and they are also not rank and file state-run military. The samurai are the samurai and should be understood within their own context. But in order to drill that point in, we have to sort of start with concepts we're familiar with and attack those concepts. So we also attacked the concept that the Nanbokucho was fought over which emperor is real. Now that is something that we can attack definitively and kill and put to sleep, because that is a historical fact. The historical fact is that the Nanbokucho was fought not over which emperor was real, but over who gets to control the emperor or the shogun. That's the actual fight. And then the third point is ninja magic was developed in the late 1600s, early 1700s, and we've attacked that by showing the general trend of samurai in total is to be very magically, have a lot of magic before the Edo period, and that it's actually the cultural changes of the Edo period lead to a decline in magic, a decline in ritual. And so therefore, echoing statements from people like Kimura Sensei, the shinobi become less interested in magic in the late 1600s. That's not when they're developing ninja magic. That's when they're not caring about it anymore. And so maybe some of the reasons that you see it appear a little bit more in certain documents is because older shinobi are trying to save it, right? And again, the other issue, and I put this on a previous slide, there was a red arrow saying that this doesn't, of course, sort of encapsulate the Ashigara Doshin level shinobi, because one might make the argument that since they may not be coming from like a hardcore samurai tradition, they may not care about magic just because of their place in society, you know, their social standing in society. But the point is that the evidence supports that shinobi were very into magic prior to the 1600s, and that shinobi interest in magic actually would decline in the late 1600s, not increase or begin for the first time. So as I said, I personally believe the details I've shared are evidence that the above three statements are false and that they can be dismantled with the historical data. Now that's my stance. And the purpose of this video is to present these questions to you, the viewers, so that you will investigate and develop your own thoughts and ideas and develop the conversation and the debate. So just because this is where I stand conceptually on these topics doesn't mean that you have to just believe me or just accept it. What I would like you to do as the viewer is to listen to what I've said and to think about it yourself. And that is it for this video. As always, these videos are meant to be brief, and they are meant to inspire you or to give you a starting off point. The material in this video is copywritten by me, so please do not steal this material. Please do not take it. Please do not copy it. Again, I hope it inspires you. I hope that it sets you off on your own investigations and explorations.